Thank you for joining us tonight on theGrio. I am your host, Marc Lamont Hill. From homeschooling to charter schools, parents might be rethinking their child's education choices, and the pandemic might be the reason. The COVID crisis led schools across the country to shut down, forcing kids and parents to integrate into remote learning models. But schools everywhere have to step their game up to meet the changing needs of Black and brown students. Joining me now is Debbie Veney. She is the Senior VP of Communications with the National Alliance. Thank you so much for joining me. Your organization recently did a story about dwindling enrollment in schools for Black and brown students. Can you break down what happened?
Sure, and thanks so much for having me. So we wanted to analyze enrollment trends, and what we saw basically is that there was a pretty precipitous drop in public school enrollment across the country. It was down by about 7%, a little over that. And meanwhile, charter schools, which are also public schools, did see an increase of a little over 3%, about 3.3% during the same time period.
Wow, that's an interesting shift. As you pointed out, charter schools are public schools. They're publicly funded. They're privately run. Why would someone make a charter school choice versus a traditional public school choice in that way during this time?
Well, we were actually super curious about that and asked parents that very question. And charter schools, which are independently run public schools, have a lot of autonomy, which was really helpful during the pandemic. So, for example, charter schools could decide to have longer school days or longer school years, or to have more instructional time in a given school topic, or they could have different curricular supports. They can choose their own textbooks because they sit independent of the school district. There's a lot of flexibility and autonomy and being able to cater to the individual needs of students, which was super appealing to parents. And also just being responsive to what the needs are. So within the Black community, we have a range of needs. And so some parents were really anxious to get their kids back into a brick and mortar school, and some were terrified. And charter schools were able to, on a week by week basis, actually ask parents, what makes you feel comfortable? Would you be wanting to send your kid back into a brick and mortar school right now, or do you prefer at home or hybrid?
Wow. So the kind of flexibility helps there. How much of a role does money play in this? Obviously, public schools, whether they're charter or traditional, are generally free.
Yes.
And so there might be parents who want an independent school, who want a parochial school, Catholic school, but can't afford it. Is public school largely an option because parents just can't afford it, or at least find it a more affordable option?
I am really glad you asked me that. We looked at all the different ways that enrollments shifted during the pandemic. And so the number one biggest shift was actually to homeschooling. That outstripped everything by far. Number two was charter schools. And then after that came parochials, independents, private schools, and so forth, but to a much smaller degree. What we found is for a lot of parents who might have felt that the school that they were zoned to attend did not work, if there was not capacity to do another, as you say, affordable free option, like a public school of their choice, like a charter school, then people homeschooled. And it was a really, really big option amongst Black families. And here's I think one of the most startling stats I found: about 20% of parents who homeschooled their children do not have a high school diploma themselves.
Wow. And so it sounds like money is one part of that. The other part of the homeschooling piece, of course, is ideological. You know, when we look at the homeschooling movement, we've seen Christian parents, Christian families who are like evangelical Christians. They wanted school their kids at home so that they can instill the values that they care. We've also seen cultural nationalist folk, for example, Afrocentric folk who want to teach their children at home so that they can push back against the traditional curriculum. So homeschooling has often been the model for people who want to teach their children a very specific thing that is very distant from schools. But in the time of pandemic, it sounds like this whole other thing comes in, a very pragmatic assessment, which is I want to keep my kids safe. I don't want them to get COVID.
That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, we asked parents amongst a bunch of variables, what would you say is the deal breaker? Like, what is absolutely essential for you when you think about your child's education? And safety was the number one answer. It actually outpaced academic rigor by about 20 percentage points, which was
Yeah.
pretty surprising.
Well, what's interesting about that is the data always shows that, right? The data always shows that safety is the number one priority of parents. The difference is, to your point, now safety doesn't just mean I don't want my kid to get shot. I don't want my kid to get jumped. I don't want my kid to get hurt on the way to school. Now safety means, again, a health concern. I mean, that's something that we've just never had to think about before.
Exactly. It's pretty phenomenal. And I think for a lot of parents, that really just trumped absolutely everything. And this is how we got different types of parents who were looking at alternative educational options. And what we also found was parents were like water finding their way through. And they were just going to figure out a way to make it work. So if it meant the zone school that they were going to was right, that was fine. But if there wasn't one, they just took matters into their own hands. And sometimes it was private schools, as you say, but it's not a lot of affordable options out there, particularly for a lot of parents of color, low-income families. So that wasn't really a great alternative. But here's one interesting thing. People just kept their kindergartners home. So they did not enroll them in public school, period. And we saw a tremendous drop off when you looked at the kindergartners. So when you looked at it was like kindergartners had the greatest drop off, followed by elementary, and then high school, you saw the smallest changes happening.
Which makes sense, right? I mean, for one, because they're more vulnerable health-wise. And if you're scared that your kids are going to be sick, the more young they are, in some ways, the more vulnerable they are. At least that's the intuitive read. Now, the health data says something a little bit different too, right? That the young kids actually probably would have been just fine. It's actually the 16-year-old who's more likely to bring COVID home than the first grader.
That's
but
right.
There is a sense of vulnerability here. And there was also a sense of the stakes are lower. I can do kindergarten. I could do preschool. I could do first grade. That's what people think.
Your finger paint. I can bring out graham crackers. Exactly. And so we saw that happening. Another interesting thing, when you look at private school numbers, some of those may look a little bit higher than what we would think of as a traditional private school setting. So daycare is private school because there are a lot of daycares that have accredited kindergarten programs or pre-K programs. And so parents were like, hey, I got to work. I need to take this baby somewhere.
Right.
Preschool has been working, so I'm going to keep the preschool thing going during the pandemic and just keep my kid where they are. And because it's a tuition-based environment, that counts as a private school.
Oh, that's interesting. Because when I think of private or independent schools, I'm thinking of, the fancy places. I'm thinking about the traditional private. I'm not thinking about daycare. That's such an interesting point here. Help me understand before we go this piece about learning gaps. We often talk about summer slide, when certain groups over the summer lose their reading scores go down, or their academic achievements, shrinks in some form or fashion, or capacity for achievement shrinks because they're not having access to the same stuff. We talk about cultural gaps in the classroom. There's all these gaps, right, for poor people, for brown people, for black people, for undocumented folk, for second language learners. If you're vulnerable, there's going to be a gap for you in school from white folk. We kind of know that. What impact did the pandemic have on these gaps, especially learning gaps?
It exacerbated it. The numbers were abysmal, as you said, for all of the folks who get the gaps, the black, the brown, the low income. And it's tragic because those are definitely children who deserve our very best. And during the pandemic, they struggled. Now, here's what we know about distance learning. It has never been an awesome option for kids who were struggling. So when you think about little children that are motivated to kind of study on their own, and they're like computer geeks and they want to take Khan Academy classes online, great for them. But for kids who struggle with reading and math, who maybe don't feel as confident academically, digital learning has never been an awesome tool for them. It has only worked when you complement it with face-to-face learning. So when you look at how face-to-face learning was diminished in so many places because of the pandemic and they couldn't go into a school building, there shouldn't be a lot there that surprises us. We know that this is not an optimal thing, but the the silver lining is we also know what works. And so now that schools are
We
open.
know what works. I like that. We know what works. That's such an important point when we talk about education policy in general, is we often know what works. The question isn't what works. The question is, do we have the will and the resources to make it happen? And for a lot of folk, we do. And for a whole bunch of our children, too often we don't. That's why we're happy that you shine such a light on this. Debbie Veney, the Senior VP of Communications with the National Alliance, we thank you for joining us. All right, still ahead on theGrio. When was the last time you checked your HIV/AIDS status? It's possible to be living with it and not even know. Still ahead on theGrio with Marc Lamont Hill, how groups in the Black community are fighting the stigma of silence. But first, student debt forgiveness is on ice. Why Republican states are fighting so hard to block Biden's plan. That's what's up next on theGrio with Marc Lamont Hill.
What's up? I'm Dorian Renaud, and you're watching theGrio with Marc Lamont Hill.